My granddaughter was sitting in the back seat of my truck, quiet as a church mouse, when she reached forward and grabbed my wrist so hard I nearly swerved off the road. "Pop," she whispered. Her voice was tight, wrong. "Pop, we can't go back to your house tonight." I looked at her in the rearview mirror. She was 10 years old, small for her age, with her mother's dark eyes and her late grandmother's stubborn jaw. She was not the kind of child who made things up. She was the kind of child who noticed things adults walked right past. "What are you talking about, sweetheart?" I said, keeping my voice easy. "It's Tuesday. We always do Tuesday dinner." She shook her head. Her hands were twisted together in her lap, fingers laced tight. "I heard them, Pop. Last night when I was supposed to be asleep, Uncle Dale and Aunt Cherie were in the kitchen and they thought the TV was loud enough, but it wasn't." She looked out the window like she was ashamed to say it to my face. "Uncle Dale said you were getting too old to run things. He said you needed to sign the papers before you got any worse." She finally looked at me. "Pop, what papers?" I did not answer her right away. I pulled into the parking lot of a gas station on Route 9 and put the truck in park. The engine ticked in the quiet. A man in a red jacket was filling up his car 10 feet away, and the whole world looked perfectly normal, and I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. "Tell me exactly what you heard," I said. "Every word you remember." She took a breath. She was trying so hard to be steady, this little girl of mine. "Uncle Dale said the doctor already agreed. He said once you signed the power of attorney, everything goes through him. And Aunt Cherie said." She stopped, swallowed. "She said you'd never know what hit you." I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel. Outside, the man in the red jacket got back in his car and drove away. The world kept moving like nothing had happened. "My name is Chester Mulvaney. I am 67 years old. I spent 32 years building a regional trucking company out of a single flatbed and a prayer. I raised 3 kids in a 4-bedroom house in rural Virginia. I buried my wife 9 years ago, which was the worst day of my life, and I have been living alone ever since, which some days is the second worst. I am not a complicated man. I fix things. I pay what I owe. I show up when people need me. And I had been handing my son the keys to my kingdom one piece at a time because I believed he was my son. I dropped my granddaughter at her friend's house that evening instead of driving her home. I told her I needed her to stay there for a couple of nights, that Pop had some errands to run. She looked at me with those old eyes of hers and she said, "You're going to be careful, right?" "Always," I told her. I had no idea yet what I was driving into. My son Dale is 52 years older than me. No, 32 years younger. Sorry. My mind slips sometimes when I get angry, and I was so angry driving away from that gas station that I could taste copper on my tongue. Dale was my middle child. Not the sharpest, not the most driven, but he was loyal, or I thought he was. He had worked at Mulvaney Freight for 12 years. I made him VP of Operations 2 years ago when my knees started giving me trouble and my doctor told me to slow down. I had been slowing down, delegating, trusting. That was my mistake. I had been so busy trying to be a good father that I forgot to be a careful one. His wife, Cherie, had always made me uneasy in a way I could never quite name. She was pleasant enough at Thanksgiving. She brought good casseroles to family dinners. She kissed me on the cheek at Christmas. But there was something underneath all of it that reminded me of a car that runs smooth right up until the moment the engine blows. I did not go home that night. I drove to the Holiday Inn out on the interstate and paid cash for a room. I sat on the edge of the bed with my shoes still on, and I thought about what my granddaughter had told me. Power of attorney. I pulled out my phone and called my attorney, a man named Garrett Pruitt, who had handled my legal affairs for 20 years. It was 9:30 at night. He picked up on the third ring. "Garrett," I said, "I need to ask you something and I need you to be straight with me." "Chester, what's wrong? Has anyone contacted your office about power of attorney documentation? On my behalf?" There was a pause, long enough to tell me something before he even spoke. "I got a call last week," he said carefully, "from Dale. He said you were having some cognitive issues. He said you were concerned about your ability to manage your affairs and that you wanted to get the paperwork started before things progressed." The room felt very small. "Garrett," I said, "I want you to listen to me very clearly. I did not ask him to make that call. I did not authorize that call. And I am sitting in a hotel room right now as clear-headed as I have ever been in my life. Another pause. Then, Chester, what's going on? I don't know yet, I said, but I need you to hold everything. Don't file a single piece of paper. And Garrett, don't tell Dale we spoke. I hung up the phone and stared at the water-stained ceiling. My son had called my attorney without my knowledge to begin the process of taking control of my life. I thought about every conversation we'd had in the past few months. Dale had started dropping things into our talks. Small things. Gentle things. He'd mention that I'd repeated a story twice at dinner. He'd say he noticed I looked tired, that the stress of running the company wasn't good for a man my age, that maybe I should think about stepping back fully. I had laughed it off every time. I thought he was being caring. I thought that was what it looked like when a son worried about his father. I had been reading a map upside down. I called my younger daughter that night too. She lives in Nashville, 1,000 miles and a different world away. She's a nurse practitioner, sharp as a tack. I had not spoken to her in 2 months because Dale always seemed to be around when I used the phone, and I always felt vaguely like I was bothering her. I see that differently now. She picked up on the second ring and I heard the worry in her voice before I even started talking. Daddy, is something wrong? I need to tell you something, I said. And I need you to not say anything to Dale. I told her everything my granddaughter had told me. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Daddy, he's been calling me too, for months. He told me you were forgetting things, that you got lost driving to the hardware store, that you left the stove on twice. Her voice went very low. I believed him, Daddy. I'm so sorry. I should have called you myself. I told her I needed a few days. I told her to stay in Nashville. I told her I loved her. And I hung up the phone and I sat there in that hotel room with the hum of the interstate outside my window, and I tried to figure out how long this had been going on. The answer, it turned out, was longer than I wanted to know. I spent the next 2 days doing something I had not done since I ran my first business negotiation at 34 years old. I listened before I acted. I drove past my own house twice a day, and I watched it from the road, the way you watch weather coming in over the mountains. I called my bookkeeper, a woman named Ida, who had worked for me for 16 years, and I asked her to pull the last 6 months of operational changes at the company without telling Dale. What she sent me made my stomach drop. Dale had renegotiated 3 contracts without my signature, or rather, with a signature that looked enough like mine to pass a quick glance. He had moved a $180,000 out of the company operating account into a subsidiary account that I had never authorized. He had hired 2 new managers, friends of his wife's, who reported to him and not to the company structure I had built. He had been systematically hollowing out Mulvaney Freight from the inside, getting himself into position to own it all the moment I was declared incompetent. He did not need to wait for me to die. That was the part that took me a while to understand. He needed me alive and incapacitated. A man with power of attorney over a living owner had more authority than an heir contesting a will. He needed me drooling in a memory care facility somewhere, unable to tell anyone what was mine. That thought sat in my chest like a stone. I went back to Garrett's office in person on a Thursday morning. I showed him what Ida had found. I watched him go pale. Chester, he said, this is fraud. This is criminal fraud. I know what it is, I said, but I don't want him arrested yet. I want him exposed. There's a difference. Garrett looked at me. He had known me for 20 years. He understood the difference. What do you need? He said. I need you to tell Dale that I called. Tell him I sounded confused. Tell him I asked you to set up a meeting to discuss the power of attorney paperwork. I leaned forward. And then I need you to set up that meeting. I went back to my house that afternoon for the first time in 4 days. I had a story ready. I told Dale I'd been staying with an old friend, that I'd been feeling a little off and needed some time to think. He was so relieved to see me that I almost felt sick about it. He made coffee. He sat across from me at my own kitchen table, with his hands wrapped around a mug that said Mulvaney Freight on the side, a mug I'd had made up 15 years ago for the company Christmas party, and he looked at me with something that might have passed for concern. Dad, he said, I've been worried sick. I know, I said. I've been worried too. I watched his face. I watched the way something shifted behind his eyes when I said that. A little quickening. A little lean forward. He thought I meant I was worried about myself. He thought I was finally going to say what he'd been waiting to hear. I think maybe it's time we talked about the company, I said. About what happens if I can't run it anymore. He set down his mug. His voice went gentle in a way that turned my stomach. Dad, I've been thinking the same thing. I just didn't want to push you. I nodded slowly. I kept my face tired, a little vague. It was the easiest performance I'd ever given because all I had to do was play the version of me he'd already decided existed. Let's set up a meeting with Garrett, I said. Get everything in order. He drove me to that meeting himself. Cherie stayed home. I had hoped she would come, but I suppose she was the smarter of the two. She had always kept her fingerprints off the parts that could be traced. The meeting was scheduled for a Monday at 2 in the afternoon. Garrett's office is on the 3rd floor of a brick building downtown. The same office where I signed the papers to incorporate Mulvaney Freight in 1989, where I handled my wife's estate, where I have done every piece of serious business in my adult life. Dale walked in like he owned it. He shook Garrett's hand. He held the door for me. He had a new sport coat on, pressed and clean, like a man who had dressed for an occasion. He had dressed for the occasion. He just did not know what occasion it was. My younger daughter was already in the building. She had driven up from Nashville the night before and was waiting in Garrett's conference room with Ida and a forensic accountant named Marcus Hale that Garrett had retained on my behalf. They had spent the weekend going through everything Ida had flagged. Dale and I sat down across from Garrett. There was a folder on the desk. Dale's eyes went to it. So, Garrett said pleasantly, Chester, why don't you tell Dale why we're here? I looked at my son. I looked at the face I had watched since the day he was born, the face that used to fall asleep on my shoulder on long car rides, the face that cried at his mother's funeral in a way that had broken my heart open. I know about the accounts, I said. The color drained out of his face so fast it was like watching someone pull a plug. I know about the contracts, I said. I know about the 2 managers you hired and what you've been paying them out of my operating account. I know about the call you made to Garrett. I know about the doctor you spoke to. Yes, Dale, I know about him too. I know you've been telling your sister I was losing my mind. He opened his mouth. He closed it. I know, I said, about all of it. The conference room door opened behind us. My daughter walked in. She stood at the far end of the room, arms crossed, looking at her brother with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Dale looked at her, then he looked at me, then he looked at Garrett. Dad, he started. This is not, you don't understand the full picture, son, I said. I built that company. I know every account number, every contract, every handshake that ever happened under the Mulvaney Freight name. I built it the way some men build houses, one board at a time, so that I would know every inch of it. You thought I was too old to notice. You thought I was already halfway gone. I reached forward and opened the folder on the desk. You were wrong. Marcus Hale laid out the documentation over the next 40 minutes. Every unauthorized transaction, every forged signature, every phone call Garrett had logged, every email Ida had preserved. Dale sat there the whole time with his hands flat on the table, like a man waiting for a verdict, which is exactly what he was doing. He tried once, about halfway through, to make it into something else. He said he was trying to protect the company. He said he was trying to protect me. He said Cherie had been worried, that they both had, that they only wanted to make sure the business was in good hands when the time came. My daughter said quietly, from the end of the table, You told me he left the stove on. You said he got lost driving to a hardware store he's been going to for 30 years. Her voice was very controlled. He's never done any of that. You made it up. Dale looked at her. I trusted you, she said. I started treating our father like he was fragile because you told me to. Do you understand what you took from us? Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Garrett pushed a second folder across the table. What you're looking at, he said to Dale, is a referral package for the county DA's office. Fraud, forgery, misappropriation of business funds. He paused. There is also a referral to the Virginia State Bar, given the nature of the representation you attempted to obtain. Dale's hands were shaking. What happened next is between me and my attorney and my children and the DA's office, and I have said what I intend to say about it publicly. I will tell you this, Dale did not go to prison that day. The legal process takes longer than a Tuesday afternoon, but the process started. And Cherie, when she realized the money was frozen, and the accounts were locked, and the 2 managers she'd placed had been let go, did not stand by her husband the way she had encouraged him to stand against his father. That told me everything I needed to know about what the marriage had ever been. My granddaughter came to stay with me for a week while things settled. She slept in the room that used to be her mother's, in the bed with the yellow quilt that my wife sewed 30 years ago. I made her pancakes in the morning, and I did not let her see how tired I was. On the 3rd day she came and found me sitting on the porch at dusk, and she climbed up into the chair next to me, which she has done since she was 4, and she sat there watching the fireflies come up out of the grass. "Pop," she said. "Yeah, baby? Are you going to be okay?" I thought about that for a while, the way the question deserved. "Yeah," I said, "I'm going to be okay." She leaned her head against my arm. She was quiet for a little bit. Then she said, "I was scared to tell you. I thought maybe you wouldn't believe me." I put my arm around her. "I have believed every word you have ever said to me," I told her. "From the day you learned to talk. Don't you ever forget that." She didn't say anything, but she held on tighter. The company is still mine. The name on the door still says Mulvaney Freight, and it is going to say that for as long as I am drawing breath. My younger daughter came on as a silent partner, not because I needed her money, but because I needed someone I could trust in the room, and she stepped into that without hesitating. Ida got a raise. Marcus Hale is on retainer. Garrett and I have lunch once a month. I do not talk about Dale often. There is a legal matter ongoing, and I have been advised to keep my comments limited. But I will say this, and I want to say it plainly to anyone who is listening. I was not too old. I was not confused. I was not fading. What I was trusting. I had lived long enough to stop looking for the knife in every hand, and someone used that against me. That is the oldest trick in the book, and I still almost fell for it. The thing that saved me was not my attorney, and it was not my accountant, and it was not 32 years of business instinct. It was a 10-year-old girl in the back of my truck who was too brave and too honest to stay quiet. If your child or grandchild comes to you with something that scares them to say, something that they have been carrying alone because they didn't know if you would listen, stop what you are doing. Pull over, turn around, look them in the eye and let them say every word. I almost lost everything because someone counted on me not doing that. I didn't let them win.